On December 25th, a suspected al-Qaeda member, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, got on Northwest Airlines Flight 253 in Amsterdam and attempted to detonate a bomb during the flight's final descent into Detroit. British intelligence had been tracking Abdulmutallab for more than a year, and his father had warned U.S. intelligence of his son's radical behavior 6 weeks prior to the incident. The U.S. has already announced it will require additional screening for air passengers bound for the U.S. from any of 14 countries, including Algeria, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria. But will this work? Is this enough, Courtney?
Well, personally, in my opinion, it's not enough. But I want to go back to these specific countries that we had mentioned. I don't believe that that's just it. I mean, we can't just be screening just Arabs. Anybody coming out of those countries should be looked at more intensely. I mean, if you're American, why are you there to begin with? But back to the original part in your question is that I'm not even going to try to say his name because Umar. His father warned U.S. intelligence, we're not communicating properly with each other. Our agencies are not communicating properly. Right. Interpol, other international agencies. And the bottom line is we just can't live in a world where we're not paying attention to what's going on and who are getting on these flights.
So British intelligence also knew about this guy and had him on a list, but there's so much noise. There's so many people on these lists and so many people they're watching, so how are we going to decide?
One thing would be simple. He bought a one-way ticket. He paid for it with cash.
That's usually a flag that gets you pulled over.
That should be
if
a
I had
classic,
done the same thing, I would have been pulled over.
Yeah, if you knew nothing else about the guy, the fact that he bought a one-way ticket and paid cash for it.
He didn't even have a passport.
No luggage.
Yeah,
he didn't even have a passport.
The signs were there, I think.
Okay, so everybody fell over on that one.
But I don't think, people on airplanes are getting less and less tolerant of this kind of nonsense. And the Flying Dutchman was the guy who was given credit for tackling the guy.
Yeah.
But there are too many bureaucracies. There are 16 different security agencies involved, and it's a huge bureaucracy. The TSA, as we know, is not the most efficient operation. So I hate to say it, but individual vigilance is going to be our greatest line of defense, but we still should expect more from the government.
Yep. What about this side of the table, Matt? You're awfully quiet.
Well, we get sidetracked on these issues of racial profiling and end up in long conversations that go nowhere and are really irrelevant to the point of what needs to be done. And whenever you're trying to figure out how to do something, find out somebody who's already doing it well and do what they do. Look at the Israeli airline. Yeah. They have a system. They use private security and they do profile, but their profiling is very detailed. It's not just race-based or religion-based. They're looking for all sorts of things. Buy a one-way ticket, pay cash, be of certain ethnicities, be from certain countries, behavior. They're also monitoring people's behaviors that are coming in. So it's no one thing, but they have perfected over time, and they're under constant threat. So they've had to get very good at this very fast of figuring out essentially what are the triggers that get people extra scrutiny and extra look, and they just don't bother with these political correct niceties because human lives are at stake. And I don't think most people who go through that system would tell you they feel like their civil rights are being violated. Ultimately, they're all very happy that nobody dies on an El Al airline. And I just think at the end, a lot of what we do and this constant taking of everybody's shampoos and, and putting the old ladies, it's just kind of bureaucratic reaction to our unwillingness to be serious about it and focus on what needs to be done, and we just let all sorts of other things come into discussion.
It's very visible, right? So everybody thinks you're doing something. If you restrict what you can bring on board, it seems like you're.
I just think that there's a tremendous amount of waste in what we do. When really the question is, we just want these planes to be able to take off and land without being blown up.
Right. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on at the airport, and I don't think it makes anybody that really travels constantly, and they have to travel for a living, and feel any safer whatsoever.
Not when they're pulling aside an 85-year-old lady with a walker with the gifts for her grandchildren. They need to focus. It's not politically correct, but they need to focus on the high-value targets.
But they're also paying, remember, the TSA people are probably not paid very well either.
Well, but
so-
we're not talking about the
Yeah.
individual employees at TSA. I mean, they're
Right.
just following instruction manuals and training they've been given. Nothing that's
Right.
going on at the airport is their fault. They're just employees. This is all about the way we decide to structure the system and the people in charge and the various agencies and all of the things that they, and that all just filters down to the poor TSA person who's forced to
Right.
then go through these steps. So, I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with the TSA employees themselves.
Do you think having more air marshals will help?
Well, I mean, again, it's not a bad idea to have a system of air marshals who are on and undercover on these planes, but ultimately, we're a little bit different than the Israelis in that we have far more flights going on. Obviously, we have, by orders of magnitude, more flights. So it may not necessarily be cost effective or even the right strategy to pay to have a private, or to have a air marshal on every single flight that's taking place.
Right.
Ultimately, if you have a good process and you get all the political correctness out of the way and you focus on what you need to do, there'll be certain flights that will be sort of high value flights that, where your whole system kind of tells you these are likely targets, and that's probably where you would put an air marshal, but you don't need to have one on every single flight.
And by the way, unionizing the TSA I don't think brings us better security. I think it brings us more bureaucracy.
We should go in the opposite direction and privatize the system and make them compete so that you can pull contracts from people that aren't performing.
Right.
Very good.